Child is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here to join my distinguished colleague from California in opposition to the nomination of Kash Patel and to make crystal clear to this body what he is going to do in that job. He has shown who he is. So when these things go wrong, I want to be absolutely clear that our Republican friends were warned. They will own the consequences of Kash Patel's misbehavior. Let's start with the fact that unlike any FBI director before, this guy is a vitriolic partisan. And those are the stripes he shows when he is left to his own devices, and those are the characteristics he will revert back to when he is running the FBI. Just a few simple examples. This is from his book that contains, called Government Gangsters, and this is a page of his enemies list. Well, Attorney General Bondi said nobody should come to a law enforcement job with an enemies list. So then they had to pretend that this was not an enemies list. Well, of course it's an enemies list. Here's what Kash Patel himself says about it. Names named, roadmap unveiled, the manhunt starts tomorrow. If you're going to set up a manhunt against people, are they not your enemies by any logical definition of the term? He goes on to a video that shows himself chainsawing off the heads of the people on his enemies list, including the handsome junior senator from California and the daughter of former Vice President Cheney. It's a pretty gross image to be cutting the heads off of people with a saw. And he didn't put it up, but he retweeted it. He loved it so much that he put it up on his own media. Things like that are not appropriate for an FBI director. They're bizarre for just a normally weird person, but for an abnormally weird person to be the director of the FBI, things are going to go bad. Be warned. He is also a completely sycophantic suck-up when it comes to Donald Trump. He wrote children's books in which King Donald rules, and his loyal little functionary, Kash, brings justice to him, pursuing the slugs of the FBI. Really? When the FBI is asked to investigate corruption in Trump world, do you think Kash Patel will rise to the occasion, or do you think he'll participate in a cover-up? All you have to do is look at his own conduct and his own history. This is not Democrats saying this. What we're doing is relating what he has said and what he has done. This is Kash Patel on Kash Patel. He spread the really abhorrent lie that federal law enforcement was behind January 6th. On one of the many podcasts and interview shows where he spewed so much disinformation and partisan vitriol, he was asked, looks like you have a preponderance of evidence suggesting there may have been federal law enforcement involved in making January 6th happen. Patel's response, I'll get you to beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt, he believed and said federal law enforcement agencies were behind January 6th. We know that is preposterous. We know that is false. We know that investigations have shown that none of that is even remotely true. That is completely false information. And yet, here he is spouting it, and that's what he's going to look like as FBI director, too. The FBI is going to have to appear before judges and convince judges of the probity of the agency, of the legitimacy of the agency, of the propriety of the investigation, that the department has done a fair job of marshaling the evidence. Here's what he says about judges. We got to start impeaching judges if they've ruled against Donald Trump. They were a political terrorist, in his view. Any case that Donald Trump's been charged in, almost every judge is handling this thing as if they were not a judge, but a political terrorist. And of course, he meant the Trump judge down in Florida as the only one accepted. When you start talking about judges that way, you can't then expect judges not to pay attention when you come before them trying to do the work of the FBI. Then there's the question of what his former colleagues have said about him. These are things that he said himself. What have his former colleagues said about him? Every single one a Trump appointee. John Bolton, National Security Advisor. I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him. Political pressure jammed him into the job, and Bolton said, I don't want any part of this guy. I was forced to hire him. The Attorney General Bill Barr, they tried to force him on Bill Barr as deputy director of the FBI. And he said, Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to lead the FBI, and said, over my dead body does he get that job. These are the job recommendations of his own colleagues that show his unfitness. Over at the CIA, they tried to stuff him in someplace. And the director of the CIA, Gina Haspel, I'm no friend of Gina Haspel, but here's what she said about him. If he came over, she would resign before allowing Patel to assume a position as her deputy. This is a guy who has a record of engagement with Trump appointees that show that he is not qualified, not capable, and somebody that they would resign before they'd let work for them. And now we're supposed to let him work for the American people? It is ridiculous. He testified once in state court on a Trump-related case, and his testimony was, to put it mildly, not convincing. Here's what the judge said. The court finds that Mr. Patel was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. Okay, people come into court, they lie, the court doesn't believe their nonsense, and statements like this happen all the time in court. But here's where they don't happen. They don't happen with federal law enforcement agents. Because when I was the U.S. attorney in Rhode Island, if one of my FBI agents had gone over into the United States District Court in Rhode Island and testified in a criminal case in such a way that one of the United States District judges said about that witness, he was not a credible witness, his testimony was illogical, devoid of evidence in the record, we'd be looking into that. This comes darn close to being what is called giglio material. Material that the government is forced to disclose to future defendants when it bears on the credibility of a government witness, an agent who is a government witness. People lose their careers over giglio material. This, if he was an FBI agent, would have caused a response in headquarters to say, what the hell is going on? How did one of our people get involved in such flagrantly fake testimony that he was called out by the judge in the case like this? And this is the person that they want to put in charge of the organization, whose probity and whose professionalism and whose integrity are essential to the successful working of the organization. And the guy was basically called out as a liar and a fraud in plain court. This guy is a hot mess. And when you have a character like this that lies in court, that runs chainsaw memes about your opponents, that every person who he tried to work with who was senior in the Trump administration said, get this bum out of here, I don't want to be anywhere near him, that's a record. And you all, my Republican friends who are going to vote on this guy, when he gets there and he does what his character tells us he will do, don't think this isn't going to come back to haunt you. And by the way, don't think that his Trump servience as FBI director won't turn on you. Just because he's a vitriolic partisan who despises Democrats doesn't mean that when Trump's ire moves someplace else to Republican office holders, he won't be there to deliver the FBI as an enforcer against you. So there is a lot to be concerned about. I'll close with this. Never before in the history of American law enforcement has somebody sought to attain a high position in American law enforcement who has pled the Fifth Amendment. Not only did he plead the Fifth Amendment, but he refused to tell the committee what it was all about. You can't plead the Fifth unless you have a reasonable expectation that could put you in jeopardy of a crime. What crime? How in jeopardy? Explain that. You're not just a normal person. You're trying to be the head of the FBI. In a civil case, pleading the Fifth entitles the judge to instruct the jury to draw an adverse interest about your testimony, that the jury can find against you because you took the Fifth. Why we have not had a straight answer yet from our Republican colleagues about why the guy who wants to be the head of the FBI pled the Fifth? It is an unprecedented, terrible